The freediving breed up. For decades, this has been a mystery in the freediving community. And still we don't know, or still people have so many questions about how we should breathe before we take that final big breath and hold our breath. Should we breathe like this? I don't think so. So how should we breathe? So long story short, the breathe up is tidal breathing. Tidal breathing is normal light breathing through the nose. We call this also TV breathing, or breathing like if you're reading a book. Nothing special, no specific breathing technique, just normal, light, gentle, calm breathing through the nose. That's the short story. The long story, however, is a bit different, because in static apnea, more and more freedivers are doing another kind of breathe up, which is not tidal breathing anymore. It is classified or labeled as a mild hyperventilation. And more specifically, we're talking about the 5-5 breathe up, 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out. So why is it different, or why can it be different in static apnea compared to normal freediving? We'll get to that in a bit, but first let me talk about tidal breathing, why we are doing tidal breathing. So the breathe up is actually a wrong name, because people might think that, well, we are breathing something up, right? And you're not breathing anything up. In fact, we don't need to breathe in a specific way. All we need to do is to relax. So the breathe up should be called the relax up, because it's not about how you breathe. It's about relaxing in the most efficient way possible, if that is even possible, right? Can you be efficient in relaxing? The more relaxed you are before a breath hold, the longer you can hold your breath. So those couple of minutes, minimum 2, maximum 4 or 5 minutes, let's say in between 2 and 5 minutes, that's the breathe up. When we do tidal breathing, it's not about the breathing. It's about you being in your own world, in the zone, not moving around, just sitting still or laying down. And the breathing is not important. So people might think, oh, tidal breathing is like the secret to a longer breath hold. No, it's just a way of breathing where we use minimal respiratory power from our muscles. So the respiratory muscles, the muscles that make us breathe, we want to use them in the most efficient way possible with the least amount of energy, and that is tidal breathing. It's a small inhalation, a small exhalation. What happens when you do bigger breaths? Then you are using more of those muscles, and the more you are using muscles before you hold your breath, the more you're using energy, and the less you are relaxed. So that's why we do tidal breathing. So it's not about the breathing technique itself, it's about just simply relaxing. Now, why? For static apnea, more and more freedivers are starting to do a different kind of breathe up. And I'm saying starting because this hasn't been always the case. It's more last couple of years that we see more and more advanced static breath holders use a form of a mild hyperventilation, a 5-5 breathe up. So before I get into that, let me explain you exactly what is the 5-5 breathe up. So you're going to do 5 seconds inhalation, 5 seconds exhalation, and you're going to do this in a continuous way, no pause in between. And we're going to aim to fill our lungs more or less with 50% of air. So when you take a final breath, you're filling your lungs with as much air as possible, so 100%. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to fill our lungs with 50% of air, more or less. You can't measure this, right? Just a way of saying don't take full breaths, 50%. And you're going to continuously breathe in and out. So this is a mild form of hyperventilation, not a heavy form of hyperventilation, like for instance the Wim Hof method. The Wim Hof method looks like this. Two differences here with mild hyperventilation. First of all, you're breathing faster than 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, and you're also breathing in more air. So you get a bigger volume of air in and out, and you're also breathing faster. So that is heavy hyperventilation. Mild hyperventilation takes in less volume of air, half of your lungs, and also slower, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. So when we hyperventilate, we are exhaling more CO2. That's the whole point of hyperventilation. It is to exhale more CO2 so that you start your breath hold with lower levels of CO2 compared to tidal breathing. So the more you breathe, or the heavier you breathe, or the more volume of air you take in, the more you are going to exhale CO2. So on the Wim Hof method or any other method where you do these big and fast breaths, you're going to exhale more CO2 than when you do mild hyperventilation. If you do tidal breathing, you're even exhaling less CO2. So on tidal breathing, you get your normal baseline, steady baseline CO2 level. On mild hyperventilation, you're lowering a little bit of the CO2, and on heavy hyperventilation, like Wim Hof, holotropic breathing, rebirthing, all these kinds of big hyperventilation methods that are not always marketed as hyperventilation, but they will decrease your CO2 levels a lot. Let me demonstrate you first the 5-5 hyperventilation, how we're going to do this. It looks like this. So we're going to do this through the mouth. And when we exhale, we're not really forcefully exhaling, but it's not also like a passive exhalation. It's something in between a passive exhalation and a forceful exhalation. And you're like controlling your lips a little bit to not exhale too fast and to feel that flux of air passing through your lips. So you're going to control the exhalation a little bit with the lips. You're going to keep on doing this. You can do, for instance, 10 cycles or 20 cycles or 30 cycles or even 40. And the more cycles you do, obviously, the more CO2 you're going to blow off, exhale, and thus the lower your CO2 levels are going to be when you start your breath holds. So if you want to be cautious with the mild hyperventilation and you're just starting out and you just want to make sure that you're not blowing off too much CO2, then you might want to start with 10 cycles only. When you get more used to it and you have done more breath holds with this breathe up, the 5-5, you're more confident about it. You're also able to relax more when you hyperventilate. Then you can do 20 cycles or 30 or even 40. The more you do cycles, the more CO2 you will exhale, and the lower your level of CO2 will be when you start that breath hold. And that brings us to the next topic. Is this dangerous? Yes or no? And if it is dangerous, how do we mitigate maybe the possibility of blacking out? And can we even control that? Can we even make sure that we don't black out? So to understand this, we need to understand the differences between actual freediving, whether that is vertical, open water freediving, or horizontal pool diving, and static. So the big difference is, of course, that in static, you are static, which means you are not moving, your muscles are not working. Whereas in freediving, vertically or horizontally, you are moving. So when you're moving, you are using more oxygen and you're also building up more CO2. When you're static breath holding, you're not moving, so you're using less oxygen. Your muscles are using less oxygen because your muscles are not working. And you're also building up less CO2 because, well, again, your muscles are not working. So with that in mind, we can get away with lower levels of CO2, and we could not get away with lower levels of CO2 when we do freediving where we move. And why is that? Because our muscles need the most efficient way of oxygen delivery, and that is described in the Bohr effect. So when we have higher levels of CO2, which we have when we are tidal breathing, right, then oxygen that is transported through our blood is released to the working muscles better by the blood, more specifically the hemoglobin, the red protein that is inside our red blood cells. It releases the oxygen molecules better to our working muscles when we have higher CO2. And that is needed when the muscles are working. So when we are freediving, vertically or horizontally, our muscles need a more efficient delivery of oxygen. Therefore, we need to have higher CO2 and thus better Bohr effect. However, when your muscles are not working and you're doing static apnea, the Bohr effect might maybe not be that important, or we could get away with a less efficient Bohr effect in order to delay the urge to breathe, the contractions, and the uncomfortable feeling. So when you start a breath hold after hyperventilation, you start the breath hold with lower levels of CO2. That means that your bore effect is not as efficient, but it's not that much of a problem because your muscles are not working anyway. So the only organs that need to keep on functioning is your heart and your brain, and the rest of your body is just doing nothing. It doesn't need that much oxygen. So it is a trade-off. So mild hyperventilation is a trade-off between feeling comfortable, so delaying the urge to breathe, delaying the buildup of CO2, and having a less efficient bore effect. And besides the bore effect, we also should talk about the mammalian diving reflex. When we have higher CO2, the mammalian diving reflex is triggered more. And when we have lower CO2 after mild hyperventilation, the mammalian diving reflex is not triggered that much. And the mammalian diving reflex will help you in holding your breath longer because it triggers bradycardia, lowering of the heart rate, and also vasodilation to the more important organs, the vital organs like heart and brain. So when you get more blood flow to the heart and brain, your vital organs keep on having enough blood and enough oxygen. So I know this is not easy to understand, but this is a video for more advanced people, I guess, or for people who want to understand more about what actually happens when you do mild hyperventilation versus tidal breathing. CO2, the level of CO2 plays a role, and your mammalian diving reflex. Higher CO2 and thus better bore effects, better MDMR, mammalian diving reflex. We get that when we do tidal breathing. Lower CO2 and thus lower bore effects and lower MDR. We get that when we do mild hyperventilation, but the reason we're doing it is because the contractions are delayed and it actually feels more comfortable, which is also important. So when a breath hold in static apnea feels more comfortable, you could actually hold your breath longer even though your MDR and your bore effect are not triggered maximally. So are we going to black out? That's what you want to know, right? So blackouts on static apnea after tidal breathing are very rare, very, very rare, because your levels of CO2 will rise that much that the breath hold will become so uncomfortable that you will stop the breath hold before you actually reach hypoxic levels. Hypoxia is low oxygen. So before you reach your blackout point, you will stop the breath hold because of higher levels of feeling uncomfortable, higher CO2. Now, if you hyperventilate heavily, like for instance on the Wim Hof methods, your hypoxia limit will come earlier before the uncomfortable feeling. So you might actually black out before you feel a reason, before your body tells you, hey, we got to stop holding our breath now and start breathing again. However, if you do mild hyperventilation, you are somewhere in between. So how do you know if you will black out or not? Well, you have to get into this. You have to start this practice of mild hyperventilation very cautiously and do it very, very mildly and only 10 cycles and see how you feel. So just like in freediving, you have to progress gradually in this. Never do this alone. Always hold your breath with a buddy. And I would say if you practice mild hyperventilation on dry static apnea, I mean, yes, you can do it alone, but as the risk of blacking out is actually higher, I would even recommend having a buddy on dry breath holding as well. Will you black out on mild hyperventilation? It's difficult to say, probably not. I have never blacked out on static apnea, mild hyperventilation. In fact, I've only blacked out once in my life, and that was on a CNF, a no-fins vertical dive in a competition after normal tidal breathing. But yes, you could black out after mild hyperventilation. I guess it's a personal thing. It depends also how much you have been hyperventilating, because just because you name something, you label something as mild hyperventilation, that doesn't mean you are mildly hyperventilating. Maybe you're heavily hyperventilating and you don't know and you just call it mild hyperventilation. So that's why you have to be cautious with this. In the beginning, not breathe too much air in and out, also not too fast, and not do too many cycles. So progress gently, gradually in this, start with only 10 cycles. Now, what is the whole danger of all of this? And I hate to say it, and I even hate to make this video. So from one side, I want to make this video because I want you guys to understand this, and people who are in freediving, and who have been practicing this for a long time, they understand the nuances. But for beginners, people who are not familiar yet with freediving, this is very, very hard to understand. It can take months or years to fully grasp the essence of all of this. And without any doubts, there is going to be someone who is going to use mild hyperventilation for freediving, vertically or horizontally in the pool, whereas I am clearly telling you to not do this and only use this for static apnea, and you don't have to. I mean, you can also use tidal breathing for static apnea. I'm just saying that more and more freedivers are experimenting with mild hyperventilation for static apnea. So I want to give you the big picture, but that doesn't mean that you have to use mild hyperventilation. The problem with talking about this is that there will always be someone who will use it for actual freediving, get in trouble and blackouts. So guys, freediving is not a sport for everyone. Freediving is a sport for those who want to understand and who want to take the time and make the efforts to truly understand difficult, complex topics like the Bohr effect, like the mammalian diving reflex, like high and low CO2 and the repercussions this has on what happens inside of your body. If you want to get freedive ready and train your breath hold from home, then join my underwater squad, school.com/underwater squad. You'll get access to our full breath hold training system, live sessions, and a worldwide community. Click the link in the description, school.com/underwater squad. And if you want to watch another video with 10 tips on how to hold your breath longer, static apnea, then click this video here. Peace in every breath.